Hello, I'm Andrew Joseph Keith, and today we're going to be doing a little gesture study sculpture. So we're going to be making the armature and then building it out with clay, and we're going to try to stay in that hour range total. So let's get into it. As far as supplies that I'll be using, I have a ruler, some 20 gauge, so it's pretty thin, soft aluminum wire that I got online. I have some pliers with wire cutters. We're going to be using these things to make the armature. And then I have some Chavant medium NSP clay. This is an oil-based clay, and it's medium, so medium hardness. And it's kind of warm out, so it should be plenty soft for our gesture study. And then as far as references, these are some references that were provided by posespace.com. And so I really like PoseSpace because they take references of the same pose from many different angles. And so I have all of these different angles that I can observe and use for this reference study. And so I really like that. These ones are censored. They're actually available for free at Proko.com under the Figure Sculpting Fundamentals course. The pose I'll be using is Jesse 223 is what the pose is called. And so let's get right into it by starting to build out our armature. So to build the armature, I like to use the cranial unit system, which is a little bit different than the head system. And so one cranial unit is about one head unit is about 1 1/2 cranial units. And so the cranial units are a little bit smaller. So that means the figure that we're going to go for is about 5.5, 6 inches, so a pretty small figure, and a small gesture study will be able to build out a little bit faster. So I'm coming here, making a bend over to the shoulder, then coming down 2 units to the elbow. And there's a video that Stan has done, 2 more units to the knuckles right here. There's a video that Stan has done on the Robert Beverly Hale cranial unit system. So if you just go on YouTube and search Proko, Robert Beverly Hale, then I think it shows up as that. And it's a great measuring system. It aligns with bony landmarks of the body, which I like because those are a little bit more convenient for sculptors. They don't move around as much. So having those landmarks that terminate at the joints, it's just a little bit more convenient. And it's really useful for building wire armatures. And so I'm just twisting this back up to the neck, and then I'm going to come down the spine. So this is the head. This is going to be one arm. Now we're going to come down the spine. And there's actually going to be a lesson that's coming up pretty soon in the Figure Sculpting Fundamentals course that goes over building wire armatures, so it'll go more in depth on this process, but for now I'm just gonna be building out a quick armature. We'll try to get it done pretty fast. I'm using 1/2 inch as one cranial unit. So we're coming out for the leg, 3 units down to the knee. And another 3 units down to the bottom of the foot. So those. Then I like to do a little loop for the back of the foot, and then the front of the foot is about 1 unit. So I'm making a little loop there. That's about right. And then you hold the foot and the wire in place. So I'm feeding wire and then twisting it around the wire that I've already measured. So this wire is just being twisted around. I'm not twisting the wires together. I'm just going over the wire that I just measured. And this gives the clay something to grab onto, and then it also adds some strength. This wire is pretty thin, and so it's good to have those 2 strips of wire. And I like this method because you're not cutting off extra wire, and you don't have to wrap extra wire around it or waste a lot of wire. So this is a method I've really liked. Okay, we're going to come over. So now we've got a leg and one arm. Now we're going to come over to the other side and 1 unit. So this, we came down 3 units here, but we're going to actually be changing that a little bit because from the top of the spine down to the bottom is actually 3.5 cranial units. So I'll show you how we'll address that in a sec. But we're coming down another 3 units to the knee. Make a little bend to indicate where that's going to be. Another 3 units down to the bottom of the foot. Then make that just like we did the other one. Bending around. And this, I'm going over this pretty fast, and so, but there will be a video. There'll be a free video on building armatures as well as a premium video coming out soon on the, or it might, yeah, it might already be out by the time this video comes out. So on building wire armatures for sculpture. So you can find that one on the Proko 3D YouTube channel, Proko 3D. And then obviously you want to come and get the full course. The full course has, you know, premium content, so premium lessons that aren't available on YouTube, and then demos, critique videos, 3D models, a bunch of great stuff. So if you're interested in figure sculpture, if you'd like to learn figure sculpture online, I really tried to include everything that I wish I would have known when I first started sculpting. This, like, for example, this technique for building wire armatures, I didn't learn this in college getting my BFA in sculpture. I learned this from a professional sculptor who was willing to take aside the time to show me his method for building wire armatures, and I've really liked it. So it's the method that I use. So we're coming back up the spine. We just gotta come up the spine and then finish the other arm. We're almost there. And things might move around a little bit as you're building the armature, but you can just bend them back in place. Okay. Coming over here for the other arm. Out 1 unit, which is 1/2 inch. Down 2 units to the elbow, which is 1 inch. Then 2 more units to the knuckles of the hand. So this little loop right here that I make, that represents the palm of the hand. See, can you see that little loop? And then I can use that loop, I can pinch it to twist the wire back up. So that that wire is nice and tight around, especially around the joints, nice and tight all the way back up. And what I like to do if I'm building armatures, I might as well build a few of them. So a lot of the times I'll just spend, you know, I'll be listening to a podcast or something and then build a bunch of wire armatures just so I have them handy. But I thought it would be good to show you guys the process and see if we can't build the armature and get a decent gesture study in this short amount of time. I heard somebody, a sculptor, talking about that sculpting is kind of like the marathon running of art, because it does take a little bit of time, but we're going to try to get a small, nicely done gesture study in just around that hour time frame. It might take, if this is your first time, it'll take a little bit more, but this is a great exercise to do often because it really helps you to look for that gesture. And then here, we're just going to cut the wire once. So we just 1 cut, and there we have our wire armature made from 20 gauge aluminum wire. And it's about, yeah, it's about that 5.5, 6 inches tall. And so that is what we're going to be using. Oh, and I said that the spine right here, it's 3.5 units, but we only came down 3 units. So what I'm going to do is bend down the legs so that it stretches it out to those 3.5 units. And I want to make sure with the wire armature that if anything, it's too thin rather than too wide, because we'll be adding clay to these areas. Okay. So now we're done with the wire, the ruler, the wire cutters, and now we're just going to be taking this and trying to build out our gesture study in clay. We go on pretty. So first things first, let's just, before we worry about the pose too much, I'm just going to get kind of a simplified version of the pelvis. I'm just going to make a little box for the pelvis. I'm going to do a little egg shape for the rib cage, and, you know, a simplified head. I'm maybe going to bend the spine a little bit to get that. And having just a little bit of mass on these forms, these primary forms, will help inform the gesture. And so I like to put just a little bit, and obviously, well, I don't know if it's obvious. It's obvious to me, but I've been doing it for a while. We want to sculpt thin, so we want to have everything be too thin because we'll be adding clay on top of these forms, on top of the primary forms of the rib cage, the pelvis, and the head. So make sure that it stays thin, but just roughly, you know, an egg shape for the rib cage, a boxy shape for the pelvis, and a simplified head, kind of like the Loomis head. And Stan Prokopenko, he also has a video that goes over that is great. So this head is really leaning forward, so I want to get that. Can do that towards the beginning. And then just a little bit of clay on for the head. Let's see, let me make sure. Here we go on that. So I'm just making sure that you guys can kind of see what's going on. Just put a little bit of a chin on and some mass for the back of the head. This is starting to look like an old person. I don't know why. Okay, and let's finish up that box shape for the pelvis. It'll give us some landmarks on the front of the body, and then we can start posing. So that's good enough for now. You can see those roughed out forms that I've established right there. And so now we're going to capture the pose. So what I like to do first is find an angle where I can see the pelvis pretty much straight forward. And that way I have an objective, you know, structure that I can base other things off of. And so this looks about right. And then there's a lot of gesture in this pose. So I really want to make sure that I capture the gesture of this pose. Hands coming up this way, reaching. And then this hand's twisting back behind the body. Then coming like that. And this leg bending up forward, stepping forward. And this back leg, you know, pushing out. So something like that. It's almost, let's see, this one's kind of twisted this way. Head's twisted this way and down. And that's looking about right from that angle. So I'm going to change to this other angle and make sure that things look good. Coming up this way. And I'm just trying to capture that flow, the the gesture of the pose. I'm just looking at the pose and trying to capture that gesture as best I can. Okay. So the first angle that I did was this angle. So looking at the rib cage or the pelvis kind of from the front angle, and now I'm gonna move on and start to build out the other masses of the sculpture. And I'm referring to my references often, so I have these set down. Let's zoom out. So I have the references right here, and as I'm sculpting, I'm looking at the references constantly, back and forth from the reference to my sculpture, reference to the sculpture, and then changing the angle often, since I have multiple angles of this pose. So let's keep building this out. So now I'm gonna build in some of the safe areas and just put a little bit of clay around the figure, so around the neck. That's what I'm doing now. I'm building just a cylinder for the neck. And these shoulders are going to be quite a bit wider than what I have. Let's then I'm just taking pieces of clay and adding them, trying to add them to the safe areas. So wherever it's safe, there's plenty of mass that still needs to be added. Those are the areas that I want to address first. And fill those in, and then once those are filled in and there's a little bit of clay on the whole figure, then I'm going to recheck the gesture and make sure that I'm on the right track, that I'm moving in the right direction, and if there's any adjustments, I'll make it right after that. When you're doing these studies, these gesture studies, and really just when you're sculpting in general, you want to be focusing on the silhouette, the outline, the contours that are outside. So that outline, that should be your main focus, rather than focusing in on the details like the individual muscles and everything. Those are, fun details and they're interesting, but you'll be much more accurate if you focus primarily on the silhouette as you're going and trying to capture that gesture. And so I'm going to go around and then start to add clay to the entire figure so that there's clay around the wire, so it's not just bare wire. Then I can, I'm building on top of something. I already have some clay laid down. That I've found that is just helpful, helps keep the wire in place. So I'm just going around, nothing too complicated, just adding kind of a layer of clay, a cylinder of clay around the wire of the arms and the legs. And I'm trying to be quick. This is a quick gesture study, and so sometimes it's fun just to set a timer and decide, I'm gonna finish whatever this project is in this limited amount of time, and then it's done. And so when you set that strict limit, I've found that often it helps. I don't know why, but it seems to help with the creativity and problem solving. You only have a certain amount of time, so you can't really dwell too much on things that might take a long time to fix. And so you really have to just address the main issues of whatever you're sculpting So it's a fun exercise just to say, you know what, I'm just going to do this gesture study in an hour, which is not very long for a full figure gesture study. Okay. Now that I have those cylinders, I can start to add more clay to beef out the legs a little bit, to build the thickness where it needs to be thick. And just adding wherever I see that it's too thin at this point, I'm just going in and adding clay and trying to pay attention to the primary gesture of these limbs. The legs, I want to keep that main gesture of whatever I'm sculpting. That's the main point of this type of exercise, is really to focus on gesture. What is essential about that pose? Abstracting out, taking out the most important elements and representing them quickly, and not worrying too much about the details. So that's the advantage of this type of exercise, is it lets you be a little bit more forgiving of yourself if things aren't quite right. And it's just a great exercise to help you to capture the gesture a little bit quicker. So here you can see the gesture that I'm trying to capture in that leg, that bend forward and then sweep back, that swoop back in the leg. And I'm just going to move on. Let's look at it from the back. Let's see, there's this glute right here that I'm looking at from the photos. So I'm going to come in and add little pieces of clay that'll represent that on each side. And this, the reference photos is very muscular, and so I want to get that musculature feeling as I'm building out the sculpture. I'm trying to make sure that you guys can see what I'm doing, where I'm putting clay. It's sometimes difficult to be talking about sculpting, and then also making sure that I'm showing what I'm talking about, or showing as I add pieces of clay. But hopefully you guys will be able to see that just the process that it's going through, where I'm addressing, and that I'm switching the angles often, looking for different places to work, building out that nice strong back. Let's add the clay to the arms. This one's maybe reaching a little bit more forward than what I had. I can do that. And just squishing some clay around to get some basic cylinders for the arms. And the proportions of the model might be a little bit different than the proportions of the average figure that I did for this armature. And so the nice thing about an armature is it's basically that internal measuring system. It lets you be a little bit looser with the measurements, because if you built your armature right, it's roughly accurate. So that's the nice thing about the armature. But if you build an armature for an average person, it's not always accurate to the model that you're doing. This one, it looks like the shoulders were quite a bit broader, and then maybe it looks like his arms are a bit longer than the average person. And so I'm not afraid to make those changes and change the armature a little bit if need be. Let's see, nice thick in these areas. Bring that knee out a little bit. and then start to think a little about the secondary forms. But really, you're focused on gesture and on the outline. But at the same time, you can add pieces of clay that hint at the anatomy and things that are going on as you recognize them. And the more you do these types of exercises, the quicker you get and the better you get. There's no shortcut to becoming really talented. I mean, some people learn faster than others, but that only takes you so far. And if you're really going to become good at something, you just got to put in the time, sit down, grab some clay, grab some wire for the armature, and build it out and say, you know what, in an hour, I'm going to see how far I can get with this pose. Let's look at it from another angle. So I'm looking at it from that angle. It's looking pretty good. Kind of, this head is kind of coming more forward than what I had. Gonna add that. And there's some more mass tucked behind this side of the leg right here. And so I'm really trying to only focus on the contours and what does the outline look like. That's basically all I have time for. I don't have time with such a short study to worry about any of the internal information that is, I mean, you can do a little bit, but beginner sculptors, they spend way too much time thinking about the internal information that's on the inside of the outline and not enough time focusing on the silhouette. So that's what I really want to get across to people, especially beginners. Like, take the time to observe the silhouette. And you can put in internal information, like here I'm building out the chest, but that's secondary. That's a secondary form. It's not the primary form. Okay, we're continuing. So let's see, the head is maybe too large. That's a common mistake that beginners make, just making the head too large. So I want to make sure I'm not making that problem or making that error. If I'm going to err, you want to err on the side of the artist, not on the side of the novice or the layman, the inexperienced person. And so in general, we tend to make the head too large. So if you're going to make a mistake, especially a mistake on a masculine, muscular guy, make the head too small, because let's just do it. Let's make the head too small, because that just makes it look more kind of brutish, like the Hulk kind of a feel, stronger and more impressive, more dominant and intimidating. And so that's so it's better, especially on this one, to make the head too small than too large. And that's usually the case. If you're going to err on the side of gestural, expressive, on the side of the artist, not on the side of the novice or the layman, the inexperienced person that just grabs some clay, they'll err on the side of too stiff, the lines too straight, not enough gesture in the parts of the figure. And so I don't want to err in that way. If I'm going to err, let's err in a way that's more interesting. And then obviously, if you can, don't err at all. Have it all be purposeful. But I'm not nearly to that level of skill to where I don't make mistakes. I just try to make the mistakes that I do make at least interesting mistakes that are somewhat thought through. Okay, he's got a lot of mass in this inside part of the leg. I'm just looking at these contours and trying to build them out quickly. Let's see. There's this muscle that's missing right here, this oblique that's twisting around the body. So I want to add that in. And then for the hand, I'm not gonna worry about it too much. There's not enough time, but I'll try to get the basic direction that the hand is going. That's about as complicated as I'll get with the hand. Okay, let's go back to the back view. There's really, these muscles that are like two cylinders coming down the back. And you can really see that spine. I want to make sure that I have that thickness, and it curves back the other way. I'm just taking two, cylinders of clay and then spreading it where I think those, let's see, and I know it's probably hard to see what I'm doing while I'm working on it, but I'm just taking little pieces of clay, putting it in place, and then spreading it out. So a little piece of clay, and just hoping that each piece of clay makes it a little bit improved and closer to the reference, or at least more interesting. Okay, let's see. This hand is kind of twisted back behind. Let's add some musculature to that. And I'm trying to see, the asymmetry of different areas. Because if you can capture that asymmetry of things like the arm and again, the outline, that makes it much more interesting than if it looks like a snowman that doesn't have that nuance of what is actually going on with the figures, or with the anatomy, with the forms. Let's see, maybe I could address the head a little bit more. And I'll make what is kind of like a Loomis head, something like that. Make sure that the thickest part is towards the back of the skull. Like so. And you can come in with your fingernail or something else and just draw in some lines if you need lines for the center lines of forms or things like that. And as you're focusing on the outline, you can still lay in clay in the direction of the anatomy. And so if you know that the bicep is going this way and it's kind of twisting around the arm, or where it inserts and things like that in this given pose, or that the forearm muscles are kind of twisting around, you can add a piece of clay that represents how those muscles are moving through space. That is a good thing to do. and something that adds a lot of interest, and just the feeling that you understand what is going on. And so there can be a sculpture that's like this, where it's simple, but if you look at masters, at the masters of the past, they would often have unfinished works or works that were simple, but you could just tell by looking at it that they really understood what was going on. They understood what was happening with the anatomy, with the gesture, with the different forms as they were moving through space. They had that understanding, and it showed through in their work. And that's something that I would like to have said about my work, is that, oh yeah, he understood what was going on. He understood the figure. And there's always more to learn. You always are trying to learn a little bit more about the anatomy, about everything. And so if you're interested in anatomy, I highly recommend the Proko Anatomy for Artists course. It's a full course. It's broken up into parts that go over sections of the body, but it's well worth it. I mean, for less than the cost of, a college class, you'll have one of the best resources on anatomy for artists that I think is available anywhere. It's just a really good resource. And anatomy, especially if you're a figurative artist, anatomy, it's just so crucial to understand what is going on. And it can be so confusing if you don't understand. And people can tell when things are off, because it's easier to see when things are off than it is to see how to correct them. But if something's off, even if somebody hasn't been trained in anatomy, it's pretty easy to see, like, oh, that doesn't look right. And so it doesn't take a super trained eye to see when something's wrong, but it does take a very trained eye to understand how to address what is wrong and make it look right. That is something that takes time, takes energy and effort. So I highly recommend investing in those Proko courses. And then obviously the figure sculpting fundamentals course is awesome. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of, we put a lot of time and effort into the course, and I really wanted to provide everything that I wish I would have been taught when I first started sculpting. And so it'll just help a lot if you are somebody that's interested in trying sculpture. And if you're not sure if you're interested, just go and watch some of the free content on the Proko 3D YouTube channel and see if you like it, if you think that sculpture is something that you'd like to learn and practice. Because I've always liked drawing and painting, but after my first sculpture class in college, I was like, you know what? Working in 3D with clay, it's just a different experience, and I really, really like it. And I hope I can convince more people to try it, because I think a lot of people would really enjoy sculpture if they just gave it a try, and it'll help inform, for people that do want to keep their primary focus be 2D art. It informs the other art, because you start to understand how the figure exists in space, and that is really useful for any type of art. Okay, let's see. I'm looking at the thickness and the direction of muscles. There's this glute here that's really traveling. It's traveling at an angle up and over, and then it's kind of blocky. at this area. I want to make sure that I capture that. That gluteus medius is really, really exaggerated. And I want to push these things. I want to have some fun. You know, it's better for them to be, for it to be pushed a little bit too far. If that's the interesting direction, and so for that angle to be a little bit, you know, too much, rather than it, because we tend to err on the side of bringing everything in line up and down. And so if we're gonna make a mistake, don't make a mistake in the way that we just tend to err. Make a mistake in the way that's, like I was saying, that's more expressive. And that's what I'm trying to do. And then there's some forms like this muscle under behind the leg that kind of go, the gestures kind of move in this way, around this way. Let's see, can you see that? And then this muscle underneath comes against that gesture. And then the wide points are offset. So I want to have maybe the high point here is back farther, the high point over here more towards the front. I just want to have it offset. That's just more interesting. And at least I think it's more interesting, and it's usually more accurate, you know, that asymmetry that I was talking about. Okay, so we're coming close to the end of this video. I wasn't sure if I'd go an hour or 45 minutes, but we might go around 45 minutes. I think that was kind of the desired length for this video. So I'm just gonna come do one more pass over everything and try to get it so that things are close enough and interesting enough. And it's not going to be perfect, you know, it's not a perfect gesture study, but hopefully it'll at least be interesting and something that's fun that you learn from. That's the goal of each project. Just get a little bit better. Those tiny, tiny incremental improvements, they really add up over time. And you'd be surprised how much you can improve if you just set aside the time to practice often and work on improving yourself and doing these types of fun assignments. Okay, I think that's where I'm going to leave it for now. Thank you guys so much. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope you try it. And then I hope to see you over at Proko.com. And yeah, this event that is going on with the Vision X, it's a great thing. So hopefully you learn a lot from this and from other artists, and participate and, you know, stay up to date with the art community, things that are going on. The Vision X Live is just one thing, and there are many other cool resources out there. So I hope you'll take advantage. Even just the free resources on YouTube, those are very helpful. So I'll see you around.